If Alberta chooses to separate, what is the process going to look like to get from where we are today to an independent, seceded Alberta? That's one of the questions that was explored at Freedom Talk, a conference devoted to exploring the idea of Western alienation and Western independence from both sides, the side of federalism and the side of separation. It was a fantastic conference, one at which I was a speaker, and also one that provided a number of opportunities for me to produce a series of videos that we've rolled out this week. We've spoken about the political response to the independence push. We've spoken about the dialogue itself. I wanted to take a moment and focus on the separation mentality, and more specifically, what would have to happen to go through that process. I spoke about that with Derek Fildebrandt, a former member of the Legislative Assembly in Alberta, and also the publisher of the now refounded Western Standard. Now, Derek Fildebrandt and I had a little chat to speak about what he would like to see happen. And he says what a lot of others have put forward, that there needs to be a referendum now. The starting of this will be, what can the Canadian government do, and what will the Canadian government do about equalization payments? And more importantly, will the federal government listen when Alberta goes with a mandate? This is what Derek Fildebrandt said needs to happen first, and where he thinks that process may lead.
All right, so what does separation, or the move towards separation and independence, look like in your view, or what should it look like?
It shouldn't look just like some people who are angry. That's a part of it. But it needs to look like something like I think we're starting to see out of a conference here, where it's a bit more thoughtful and intellectual, where we're having an honest conversation. It's not just merely saying, I think there should be a vote, and we hold a vote, and then we're a country. It's not like that. It's a lot more complicated, and I think those who want independence need to acknowledge that. So a conference like today, like we're having for the last 2 days here, is a big step in that direction. So something that's more thoughtful and credible than just simply anger.
How should anger, of which there is a great deal, be channeled? And similarly, how should all the ideas that we're seeing being put forward at this conference be put into something that would actually move Albertans that are not happy with the status quo towards a solution?
Well, I'm not against there being anger. There's a very good reason for the anger. I just think it needs to be channeled in a positive direction. I think the discussion, you've got a small, roughly, people are in thirds here. There's roughly a third who are status quo federalists, as would be represented by the NDP or federal liberals here. You've got roughly a third who I think are now in support of independence, one third that are sovereigntists, and a third who are reformers, who want to see a radical reformation of federal structures and powers and intrusions within Alberta. But I honestly think that there's almost no hope of reform. We spent 20 years on the West wants in, and we spent 10 years in government, and we barely got anything out of it. We just had a federal government that was just not as hostile as previous federal governments to us. And then those marginal gains that we had were rolled back in 6 months of Trudeau anyway. So the question is, are the reformers represented by Jason Kenney going to be successful in trying to dampen some of the anger and make people feel that enough can be done on the reform side? Or is he going to run up against the wall here, which I fear he will, which I think would result in a more binary decision between accepting the status quo as virtually a colonial outpost of Ottawa or independence. And I think it'll eventually come to a choice of that as we realize that there is not going to be any reform of the federal system.
What do you think would be the straw that breaks the camel's back that tells you for sure reform is not going to happen, Alberta needs out?
I think we would find out very soon if we have a referendum on equalization. It'll feel good. Albertans will vote to change it or get rid of it in overwhelming margins. But we're going to send that to Ottawa, and what's going to happen? They're going to tell us to pound sand. And then we're going to have two choices here. We can accept a humiliating yoke of the status quo, or we can move towards independence. It's one reason I actually don't think there's going to be a referendum on equalization. It's being talked about, but all of the conditions that Ottawa must meet to avoid it have been quietly dropped by Premier Kenney one by one until it's just now TMX that's left. TMX is probably going to get built, and so he'll declare victory on that. I think the Premier here is very afraid of what happens if he holds that equalization referendum, because the result will be very clear for everyone to see. We're gonna vote on something to reform the federal system. We're gonna send it to Ottawa, and Ottawa's gonna tell us to get lost.